Hey, welcome back to week 2. For our next video for this week, I'm going to talk to you about formulating a strong research question because I've been mentioning this in a few videos, but our focus this term is problem-based argumentative research, and you're choosing a source for your précis. It can be about anything. So, right, your topic for your précis doesn't not necessarily have to be the topic you follow for the rest of this term, but after the précis is over, we're going to work on a proposal and you're going to follow a research question. And whatever topic you choose for that research question, that is going to follow you for the remaining weeks of this class. It'll end up being about 7 weeks with the same research topic. The précis, once again, does not have to be exactly the same as what you follow the rest of the term. The précis is more about practice. It can be about any topic you want. But after the précis, we are going to focus on problem-based argumentative research, where you're trying to find a solution to a problem that exists in the world. I would encourage you to have your précis source relevant to maybe what you want to research for the rest of the term, but it's okay if you're not sure yet. The précis is all about practicing and finding that source online just to see if you're interested in it. So we're going to get started. This is how to formulate a strong research question, and this will become more relevant, like I said, after the précis. You're going to start thinking about what you want to research the rest of the term, but it is relevant and important to talk about now too. So as mentioned, the focus of our class is problem-based argumentative research. You're going to choose a real-world problem to research and look into solutions to that. And you are going to stick with the same research question and topic for many weeks. But I want to begin by encouraging you to approach research this term with an open mind. I don't want you to go into research thinking, oh, I already know what the solution to this real-world problem is. That's what my argument's going to be. I would rather you go into this research not necessarily knowing what all the sides or solutions are yet. I think it can give you more well-rounded research, and it would be a little bit more engaging when you're looking for things as you learn as you go, right? So I would encourage you, try not to go in with too much bias already. This is known as confirmation bias. So that's when we seek information that already supports an assumption that we've made about a topic or about a solution. It doesn't challenge your beliefs at all, but I think that's a really important thing about research is to go into it with more of an open mind, not necessarily knowing that, which solution is going to be the best option. So I would encourage you to research without bias. And here's an example. This is an example that I had someone do from a previous term. Don't go into your research already knowing that you want to argue that wind energy is the ideal form of renewable energy for whatever goal that we're trying to reach. And I think the students we were trying to reach, how can the US become more of a fully renewable nation? And they ended up arguing that wind energy was the one that we should invest in more than other ones to get us closer to whatever solution they were trying to find, right? So I would go into it with more of an open mind. Don't already assume that you know the answer might be wind energy. Go in not necessarily knowing and be curious about what the answer might be. So I think it's a lot better when you go in without that confirmation bias. So let's start with a few tips for how to write a good research question. It shouldn't be too broad or too narrow. It should be something you're interested in, and it should be arguable. This means it's not just one-sided. That's a huge thing about this class. And it can't be answered with a yes or no. You can't just say yes or no in response to the question. I have some examples coming up. It can't be purely opinion-based. There has to be research that's relevant to the topic. It can't just be your opinion. And for this class, it should attempt to solve a real-world problem, or at least offer solutions to problems that exist in the world. One thing I like to suggest is think about your field or your degree program. What sort of problems exist in that field or that program? So here are some examples of broad versus narrow, right? So if your topic is too broad, it'll have way too many research hits. If it's too narrow, you're not going to get enough. My suggestion for you is down here in red. It says stronger research questions often begin with how, which, and why. I would recommend when you come up with your research question for this term, you start with one of those words. Because if I ask you how to do something, it requires an explanation. If I ask you which, it requires a comparison. And if I ask you why, we need more of an explanation there too. If you started a question with is, those is questions can often be answered with yes or no. And if you start a question with what, it's often just a list of things and it doesn't necessarily invite too much comparison or an explanation. So I would recommend how, which, and why. Here are some examples for research questions that I've seen in this class. Let's say you're really interested in renewable energy. You're wondering what benefits come from it. I think a better question would be which form of renewable energy will help transition the US to a 100% renewable nation. That's a lot more narrow than just saying what benefits come from it. So you're trying to identify a problem, and this is a real topic someone chose. The student thought about, climate change is a huge problem, energy sources, resources, and more. The solution this student wanted to find is what can make this transition to getting us more renewable. And their argument that they ended up with, this was after many weeks, was that wind energy was the best to transition the US because of these reasons they found in their research. They didn't know that going in. That was not part of their cognitive bias. They didn't know that going in. And I think that was a great thing, is that with researching, they were able to determine how can we reach this point to solve some sort of problem. It's through whatever they ended up finding for research. So the structure, the flow of the research for this class is we start with a problem, you research solutions, and then you formulate an argument. It will take many weeks to come up with what this argument will be. So it's okay. You don't need to start there. Do not start with the argument portion, right? Start with the problem, and we're going to build up to what that argument will be. Here's one more example. I had a student interested in looking at declining salmon population in Oregon, and they wondered, why is this happening? Why are the salmon dying? And then after researching, they found dams were part of the problem. And so they asked, how can dams be improved so that they do not negatively affect salmon runs in Oregon rivers? This one was a lot more narrow than the last question because it was focused on Oregon specifically. But here's that kind of structure again, that flow, is we start with the problem. They've discovered that it was dams and the declining population. What they wanted to solve was, how can we change the dams or improve the way that salmons go through rivers to help them? And the argument that this student ended up with, again, this was after many weeks of researching, he didn't know this at the start, was that fish ladders at dams need to be improved in order to help save the population because the dams were damaging that population. So again, he didn't start here. He had no idea what he was going to argue. He started with this problem, right? So there's a declining population. What can we do about it is what he wanted to research. So I have some more examples for you just to show you an example of what I think is too broad versus too narrow for this research we're doing. This question here says, how does big business destroy the economy? I think that's pretty broad, right? So we don't know what big business it is. We don't know necessarily what destroy means in this context. I think it's a little too subjective, and we don't know which economy. So the first thing I would do is, let's get rid of that destroy language. I think that's a little too subjective, and it's definitely more negative. We're trying to stay a little bit more objective for this. You're going into research without bias. And then we're going to change big business to a specific one, and the economy to a more specific one also. So maybe you end up with, how does Amazon financially impact local economies? That's a lot more narrow than just asking, how does big business destroy the economy? So you'll want to think about, how can I narrow my question down to make it a little bit more focused? And I want to mention that a lot of research for this class is not just side A or side B. It ends up being something that's a lot more multifaceted. There might be sides A through C, A through Z, for all I know, right? So it can be a pretty complex issue. What you are going to end up doing for this class is trying to narrow it down to, what are 3 solutions to this problem, or 3 main themes that all of my sources talk about in relation to this problem. But the way you want to organize the paper that we're building up to many weeks from now is, what are these 3 main solutions that we can do? And you're going to be comparing some of those together. And I have a few more examples here. You're welcome to look through these on your own, but I have some examples on the left of research questions that I think could be made stronger. And then on the right, what some of my suggestions could be for making those a little bit more narrow or more specific. You'll notice they start with which, there's a how, there's a why. And over here, we have more of a what, an is, and a what. So I would recommend how, which, or why questions. And then, like I've been saying, your research question is going to be a guide. Your aim is to answer that question through research, but it takes a lot of weeks to get to what your argument will be. I'm not asking you to start with an argument. We're building up to that over time. So when we eventually get to this point, right, you're going to end up with an argumentative thesis. And these 2 examples down here are real theses that I received from students in the past using those same topics from the previous slides. So this one was, wind energy is the most reliable form and the one that will help transition the US closer to a 100% renewable nation at a quicker pace. The reason that that's an argumentative thesis is because someone hearing that would most likely disagree, right? They would say, I don't think so. But the whole point of the paper we're writing is to prove this. You're trying to make an argument for why is this correct. Same down here. This student said changes must be made to the current fish ladder system that Oregon dams use to allow fish to pass upstream in order to avoid this population declining any further. Someone reading that might disagree. And in fact, if you're from Oregon or Southern Oregon, you might know that a lot of dams have been removed lately, which was a totally different solution to different, multitude of problems. But someone reading this, the whole point is that they might say that's actually not the best solution. But the whole point of what our research is you are trying to prove this through research. You think this is the best solution. You're formulating an argument. So I hope that was helpful to see. I just wanted to go over how to formulate a strong research question because this will help set the stage for the sort of research we're doing this term. Like I mentioned, the précis is totally fine if the précis is on a totally different topic. That one's more just for practice, for you to find a source and evaluate it. But then when we get closer to the proposal, that's going to be after week 3. That's when you're going to formulate your research question and start thinking about what do I want to research for the rest of the term.